Chapter 4. Maximin Giraud, Tested and Proven. Through his secret, the shepherd of LaSalette received a mission in the Church, that of warning the papacy of the events announced by the Mother of God. From the doctrinal point of view, the Pope needs only the infallible assistance of the Holy Spirit. But from the disciplinary point of view, in matters of direction and measures to be taken, he needs the advice of the wise, the instructions of the learned, and sometimes the pious impulse of visionaries, whose good spirit he must endeavor to discern without rejecting it out of hand. The history of the Church, through numerous events, demonstrates the correctness of this assertion. A pope must consult on pain of falling into many administrative errors. Therefore, the secrets of LaSalette are graces for the Church itself. Pius IX, no doubt, had no difficulty in recognizing this. Now, as a general rule, those who have received a mission in the Church, especially if it is a mystical one, must expect to suffer, more or less, according to that warning which God himself gave to St. Paul by Ananias. Quote, "He is a chosen instrument of mine to carry out my name before the Gentiles and kings and the sons of Israel, and I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." Unquote. Acts chapter 9, verse 15 to 16. Consequently, Maximin would not be a true messenger of heaven if he were not honored with the sacred stigma of contradiction. Besides, trial is the usual state of the predestined, and it would be wrong to write the history of their lives only in terms of successes and miracles, concealing above all their troubles with the authorities. Oh, how tormented was the life of Maximin! "I love the saints who were not always saints," wrote Bishop Gome about the good thief. "For myself, I say, I do not love the saints who have not suffered and been humiliated. Nothing has won me over more to the cause of Marie Julie, the great victim of La Fraude in the Diocese of Nantes, than the careful examination of a very authentic letter written in 1876 by a distinguished visitor to the ecstatic. I summarize it in these words. On September 17th, the feast of the Stigmata of St. Francis, I saw the Stigmata of Marie-Julie Jeanne shedding blood, as she had predicted for that day. I witnessed on that day her ecstasy, in which she announced that Bishop Fournier, her protector, would soon die, and that after his death she would be persecuted, slandered, and administratively forgotten for the rest of her life. The perfect fulfillment of this prophecy of humiliation for 37 years has filled me forever with respect and esteem for this unrecognized stigmatist. May what I am about to write of Maximin have the same result with those who will read these lines, since the reflections of the glorious apparition of September 19, 1846, have put a crown of thorns on his forehead. This is the thought that the seer of the Dauphin publishes in his pamphlet, quote, "My Profession of Faith," unquote. If I am made out to be cunning enough to invent such a trickery, the apparition, how can I have been stupid enough to turn it against my own interest? If I have run after fortune, glory, and pleasure, it must be admitted that I have lost my way. I say without regret that I have acquired none of these. I say more, my testimony has always been the cause of my vicissitudes. Why was I not left in my mountains? My career, less agitated, would have given me more joy. The black bread of my village would not have failed me so often as the more sought-after food of the big cities. I say more, I would be rich by now if I had had the cowardly complacency to deny myself. These lines, so true in 1866 when they were published, were true until his death in 1875. It is necessary to confirm, to Maximin's honor, his testimony by an abridged account of his various trials, temptations, poverty, illness, and humiliations. God did not spare the most humiliating temptations to St. Paul, St. Anthony, St. Jerome, and 1,000 other saints. It is therefore to be believed that Mary's shepherd, at least in his youth, was not exempt from them, according to what he himself wrote about his life as a seminarian. He said, "I suffered and wept more than once at the foot of the crucifix in my cell. The devil himself did everything to make me fall into despair and even impurity. Terrible was the struggle between nature and Satan." He wrote these other lines which make it all clear in a few words. "I am obliged to endure sometimes such violent assaults that I have wanted to pronounce an unholy vow, to wish the miracle of LaSalette had not taken place, in order to be able to give myself up without constraint to the inclinations which importune me. Ah, if people knew what it costs one to preserve myself and remain true to what I am, they would forgive me for not being a hero of perfection, the pearl of Mary's children. Without the fact of the apparition, which happily enchains me with its divine embrace, it is probable that the impetuous impulses of my nature would have won the victory, but the memory of the divine prodigy is a salutary restraint." To these inner struggles we must add the assaults of the world. Maximin, as a young man, was assailed by the ardent curiosity of pious women, and moreover by others whom the devil pushed towards him. A father of LaSalette once took the liberty of probing him thoroughly on this delicate point. The shepherd replied, "When one has seen the Blessed Virgin, one thinks no more of women." No doubt, libertines do not believe in such graces, but the lives of the saints are no less full of these marvels of preservation. God made Maximin's entire existence a permanent miracle of virtue, even in the barracks of the papal zouaves. In this excellent milieu of honest and truly Christian young men, traps were set for his virtue. Let Mr. Guy de Coq speak to us, Maximin's regimental comrade in Frascati, who was favored by the Blessed Virgin. She had appeared in Pont-Main over his own house in 1871. Freemasonry had sworn the doom of Mary's shepherd as soon as it learned of his enlistment. It sent after him several Carbonari, its guilty instruments in the Pope's army, with orders to drag Maximin into a life of disorder. But, protected by Mary, he always remained chaste and invulnerable. Furious that they could not corrupt him, the Carbonari resolved to attack his good name in this manner. They would make him tell them about the apparition of the beautiful Lady of LaSalette, while irritating him to no end. And when they saw him exhausted and dripping with sweat, they said to him, "Come on, comrade, have a drink." And he, without any resistance, emptied his glass, not suspecting that it contained a wine adulterated in advance to intoxicate him. Then they defamed him and made their defamation reach Pius IX, who was distressed to hear it. To bitter reproaches, based, it is true, on a few isolated and not serious acts of intemperance, Maximin would kindly reply, "I see no great sin in it. I have pious wine." In spite of these weaknesses, or rather surprises, Maximin's heart, which would be placed in a wall of the sanctuary of LaSalette, was nevertheless a pure and quite respectable heart. It is even the heart of a martyr because of all that he suffered for the cause of the weeping Virgin. Indeed, virtue does not consist merely in resisting the lure of sinful pleasures, but also in patiently bearing the pains of life, which are the ordinary lot of all human existence. He whose testimonies served to bring up, during his lifetime, at least 1,000,000 francs to the holy mountain of the Alps, endured personal poverty, with its privations, and especially the anguish of the specter of crippling debts. In 1849, his father left him a legacy of debts. In 1858, when he left the seminary, he was unable to support himself, and thus sought humble employment with a tax collector near Grenoble. But after a short time he was dismissed, being judged unfit for the demands of the job. He then decided to seek a livelihood in Paris, which corrupts France, he said, as France corrupts the world. He went there twice for this purpose, in 1859 and in 1861. On his first trip, for 4 consecutive months, he had only 10 francs to live on, so that he slept 15 nights under the stars, shedding many tears at the memory of the 8 days he spent in 1846 with the good Father Selmy. This means that in Paris he lacked bread and would have died of hunger had it not been for a real miracle, the account of which I reserve for the end of Maximin's biography. The practical consequence of this miracle, which we shall soon see, was that in June 1859 he found a lucrative job of 1,500 francs a year at the hospice of Le Vessinet near Paris. Alas, he lost this position on January 10, 1860, because by indiscreet visitors he was recognized as the seer of Our Lady of LaSalette, which drew down the attention of his employers, who were hostile to the supernatural. With what he had earned, and he was loaned, he enrolled in the College of Tonnerre in order to complete his education and make a new career for himself. In 1861, he sought a new career in Paris, where he was again plagued by poverty, so much so that he fell ill and was admitted for 8 days to the St. Louis Hospital. When he was discharged from the hospital, he was destitute and without a home or profession. It was in this year of hardship that he was gradually adopted by the Jourdain couple, wealthy merchants in the parish of St. Mary. The husband was a member of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, and the wife was treasurer of a work for the poor under the patronage of Blessed Mary of the Incarnation. Unfortunately, as I have said, Maximin was the cause of the ruin of his benefactors, who had given him their villa, located near Paris, and whose loss was completed by the German invasion of 1870. Financial security was thus short-lived in the life of our hero, and he paid very bitterly for that brief relief by witnessing the embarrassment and eventual destitution of his adopted parents, whose misfortune he had caused. What a torment for his soul, so upright and so good. Once a friend and table companion of rich people, God allowed him to be forgotten and perhaps despised by them. 3 times in his distress, he turned to the missionaries of LaSalette and the Bishop of Grenoble, asking them to come to his aid in 1864, 1869, and 1872. Father Le Bailiff published in 1881 that none of the 60 LaSalette historians before him, who were well aware of the facts, had dared to reveal the harshness of the administration towards poor Maximin. Even though the official press of the Diocese of Grenoble ended up showing a favorable attitude to this worthy child of Mary, I consider that it is not good to remain silent on regrettable acts of the authorities, because they are to the honor of a visionary who did not enrich himself with all that he did for Our Lady of LaSalette and the construction, even material, of her sanctuary on the Holy Mountain. In a single day he gave the missionaries the sum of 5,000 francs, the proceeds of various collections, after relating to the pilgrims his account of the event of September 19, 1846. And I believe that never in his entire life did he receive that much in his distressing poverty, neither from the missionaries nor from the Bishop of Grenoble. In any case, I am publishing his appeals to their pity, according to the history which has remained unchallenged, and which on this point can never be denied. I hasten to pay tribute to the kind hearts of some of the fathers of LaSalette, such as Father Sylvain Marie Giraud, 1885, and Father Buisson, 1890, always faithful and devoted to Maximin, who refused to accept money from pilgrims, knowing his precarious position. There is nothing more eloquent than his letters of request for help. They are numerous, long, and intentional. Let us content ourselves with a few pertinent extracts. On December 24, 1864, he wrote to Father J.B. Berlioz, "When I attended the major seminary in Dax, it was against my will. On my return, with the help of a faint recommendation, I placed myself with Mr. Jerry, the tax collector of La Trance. You agreed to pay my board for only a month or 2. When I was soon dismissed for my deficiency in mathematics and took the road to Paris, you were all delighted. When after I found a position but was dismissed for my deficiency in grammar, you abandoned me. When I made my request for help as a poor patient, full of rheumatic pains because I had slept on the damp ground and suffered hunger and thirst in Paris, you scorned me. You blamed me and all those who did me good, because at LaSalette they had benefited from Melanie's testimony and mine. So refuse the bishop what he gives you for yourself. If he still refuses to give bread to me, the first missionary of Our Lady of LaSalette, grant me my request, even if you put one less stone in the sanctuary. And then he who has sacrificed everything for Our Lady of LaSalette will have bread. To Father Berlioz, he apologized in a long letter of January 15th about his personal poverty. In 1869, Bishop Gunuliac of Grenoble was even harsher than the good missionary of LaSalette. The shepherd had asked him for a few small alms, which would have preserved him from want and exempted him in particular from doing at LaSalette the job of being a distiller of liquor, which he disliked. Here is the text of Maximin writing on October 26, 1869, to the Jourdain couple, his adoptive parents, who were also in a precarious situation which he could not relieve without a trade. The missionaries of Our Lady of LaSalette, led by Father Giraud, were admirable. For me and for you, they went to throw themselves at the feet of the bishop and beg him to come to our aid. But his episcopal heart was as hard and frozen as ice. He spurned me and the beloved fathers. I do not ask anything more of his grace. I think I have shown him all the respectful deference due to him as a bishop. From now on, I do not want to have recourse to him. It is over between him and me. However, driven by greater misery, Maximin returned in 1872 to knock on the door of his successor, Bishop Poligny. On March 2nd, he wrote to the bishop in these touching terms. I went to invoke the charity of the good fathers of Our Lady of LaSalette. They are all concerned for me. Their hearts are filled with sorrow at seeing me, Maximin of LaSalette, the first missionary of the august apparition, in such a sad situation, while they themselves have everything in abundance. Despite their goodwill and good intention, they cannot assist me without your authorization. They advise me to express to you all the sorrow they feel at knowing that I am disgraced by poverty. Having given them a large supply of coal, wheat, and potatoes, if you would allow them to share with me a handful, which would be of great service to me, they assure me that they would not suffer. During the summer, will I earn enough to support myself? Be assured, my Lord, that it gives me no pleasure to beg. As soon as I am in a position to earn my living, I will be in a hurry to allow you to send the help I am begging for myself to other poor persons. It is only my great need, real hunger, which sometimes forces me to ask the parish priest of Cor and Father Pons for bread. The winter has been very hard. We have suffered so much. May your heart not be closed to a poor child of your diocese. Bishop Poligny, in that winter of 1872, was as ice-cold as Bishop Gunuliac. How can we explain his cruel administration of the privileged child of Our Lady of LaSalette, whose pilgrimage brought glory to the Diocese of Grenoble? The pilgrimage enriched muleteers, valet drivers, and hotel owners, while its greatest offender was dying of hunger under the eyes of the Church. Why this abandonment? Maximin was, quote, guilty of failing to obey the pious wishes of Bishop Poligny. Who would have preferred the shepherd to become a priest or religious? On April 26, 1872, Maximin replied to his intractable bishop, quote, if God had called me to be a cleric, I would have become one long ago. If I sought fame and riches, the road to follow would have been to speak in a manner pleasing to worldly unbelievers. I prefer worldly poverty more than the thrones of pontiffs or all the fame of great preachers." Unquote. Was the author unaware that Maximin would have been happy to serve God in the priesthood, but to continue in the seminary his superiors demanded to know the secret? The fame of great preachers is an allusion to Father Hyacinth, Pierre Jonquois, a Dominican who caused a public scandal by his marriage. Saint Therese prayed for him in her last agony. Jonquois, born around 1860, was cremated in Paris in 1928. Jonquois had stood alongside Jean Jaurès at the inauguration of L'Humanité, a French daily newspaper which was an organ of the French Communist Party, and to this day maintains links to the party. It's with regret that I'm obliged to shorten this letter, so noble and so courteous, from the poor distiller of LaSalette, who is in debt. The Diocese of Grenoble is certainly responsible for this humiliating condition for Mary Shepherd, or more precisely, it is the sole responsibility of Bishop Poulinier's conscience, for the obvious reason that episcopal power in the Church was absolute, and the bishop was not obliged to follow the advice of his official council, which has only a consultative voice. Now the exercise of absolute power is corrupt absolutely, because of the pride innate in every man, and especially in bishops who are inclined to it, without suspecting it, by living in a noxious atmosphere of incense, genuflections, and adulations. We should not be surprised, therefore, at the administrative errors which are caused by the principles of a dictatorship which are in daily practice in ecclesiastical government. I feel inspired to give voice to these reflections because of the failure of certain canons to speak to the bishop in favor of Maximin and the Jourdains. Often the poor will suffer in peace all kinds of material privations, on condition that they have health and employment, which are the two things that they ask for from the good Lord. The favor of good health, which like the sun dispels sadness, was refused to our messenger of Mary from the age of 28 until his death by the one who causes little birds to sing and live without concern for the morrow. The new Belisarius of Our Lady of LaSalette suffered throughout the last 12 years of his life. The latter part of the 18th century witnessed a revival of themes from classical history with an emphasis on the individual person and morality. Belisarius appears in art at this time as a, quote, suffering hero, unquote, a brave 6th century military commander who was accused in Constantinople of having participated in a conspiracy against Justinian. Belisarius was found guilty and imprisoned, but eventually Justinian pardoned him, ordered his release, and restored him to favor at the imperial court. As early as November 14, 1864, the physician at the major seminary in Erie had told him of the illness that would slowly lead to his death, an affliction of the heart, endocarditis. The remote cause of his illness was to be found in his deprivations and imprudence. From 18 to 25 years of age, Maximin liked to lie on the lawn in the shade of the tall trees, and even preferred breezy places. And later, without any concern, he had discarded the red flannel belt he had been made to wear in the regiment of the Pontifical Zouaves. It was particularly in the winter of 1873 to 74 that his usual asthma took on a character of excessive gravity. When in June 1874 he was already suffering edema, he found himself without bread, without sugar, and without money to buy the prescribed remedies. Sometimes, in fits of depression, he had seen himself near death. He spent his last summer in Corps in 1874 without being able to climb his beloved mountain, even once. Doesn't that say it all? How could he get well with a mere 60 francs of alms that he obtained with difficulty for each of the last months of his life, in view of the deprivations even of clothing from which his adopted parents who were once wealthy also suffered? In spite of all his beautiful friendships with wealthy persons and his discreet appeals to certain purses that should have opened easily, God allowed the apostle of his heavenly mother to die in cruel poverty. Heaven, moreover, imposed upon him the great pain of leaving the Jourdain family without means of support at the end of their charitable life. Was this not the height of poverty for him? In this last valley of tears, there's something harder for human weakness to bear than poverty, even dark poverty, and that is humiliation. That is why nothing delights me more than this answer of St. John of the Cross to our Lord, who asked him what reward he would receive. John of the Cross replied, quote, "To suffer and to be despised," unquote. Well, having granted this, quote, blessing to the famous seer of the Alps, so gloriously represented in so many shrines standing before the heavenly apparition of 1846, let us leave aside all those who in writing or in speech discredited Maximin after his death, saying that he had gone astray. This is the usual refrain of those who want to speak of him without having read his true story. Ah, truly to this day, he is greatly misunderstood, although the most recent historian of the apparition is not unfavorable to him, although holding a regrettable silence on the secrets of LaSalette. L'histoire de l'apparition de la Mère de Dieu sur la montagne de LaSalette. Translated, History of the Apparition of the Mother of God on the Mountain of LaSalette, by Reverend Father Carlier, 1912. Price 4 francs. Let us deal with the only known opprobrium which our hero has had to sanctify with his usual patience. I know that in connections with a few minor surprises in the matter of alcohol, he received some real affronts. I do not hesitate to assert that he made little of them, because anything that concerned the honor of his private life, he wrote, affected him little, and in such cases he quite willingly shut himself up in noble silence. But the outrages that harmed his mission cut him deeply to the heart, and he made it his duty, with good reason, to defend himself according to the circumstances. In 1865, defamed by a prominent newspaper, La Vie Parisienne, number 11 of November, he not only demanded through legal channels a reparation of honor, but he also set the record straight in his pamphlet, quote, My Profession of Faith, unquote. It is a real monument in the history of the event of LaSalette. For 18 months, he was the object of passionate attacks because of his lifestyle as a distiller on the very mountain where he was blessed with a truly divine vision. He was called a swindler and a fraud for unintentional debts. Consequently, on March 14, 1873, he brought a commercial lawsuit against the exploiter Vivier, mentioned in the introduction, who was causing him so much material and especially moral damage. And this trial was to his credit in May of the same year. Nor did he hesitate to sue the printer of the Annals of the Fathers of LaSalette for damages, while apologizing to the superior for being obliged to resort to this extreme measure. From the time of Maximin's first complaints, that defamatory issue of June 1872, which has now become unobtainable, was made to disappear. But the July issue of 1870, page 224, which presents the first hint of the defamation, can be found in the Bibliothèque Nationale. Nothing in his entire life was more sensitive to the servant of Mary than to hear himself slandered from the pulpit of the sanctuary of LaSalette by his own bishop, Poligny, during the national pilgrimage of August 21, 1872. This prelate publicly reproached him for being a prodigal son and for having abused the grace of a priestly or religious vocation. As a punishment from God, he showed him to be a degraded person. These undeserved reproaches were heard by thousands of listeners who spontaneously echoed them. On that memorable day, Melanie's poor companion could not help but distance himself from the crowd of pilgrims and go in secret to weep loudly and long. However, he did not want to protest openly against his defamer, whose preconceived ideas he could not have changed, since in his irrefutable letter of April 26 of the same year, he had complained to him with effect about receiving letters signed by priests of his diocese and certain LaSalette fathers, writing to him that he was the opprobrium of the human race. Father LaBailiff, before publishing his beautiful work, Maximin Peint par lui-même, Maximum Self-Portrait, wanted to consult Melanie about a fact from 1849 concerning the childhood of the shepherd, who was accused of having climbed the walls of the school and of having taken the key to the fields out of spite and annoyance at being interned with the nuns of Cor. The venerable shepherdess replied, "No, Maximin did not scale the walls of the convent. No, he never complained of our peaceful community life. Far from it. But he climbed with admirable generosity walls of calumny and contradiction to follow in the footsteps of the divine crucified." Some participation in the humiliations of the divine Savior represent the providential reason for the undeserved discredit of many of God's servants. And generally, it is by the good spirit of the martyrs to suffer in peace that one recognizes the sometimes satanic blindness of their persecutors. But how much it costs to suffer injustice patiently in spite of this very counseling word of the man of sorrows. Quote, "Blessed are those who suffer for the sake of righteousness," unquote. Matthew 5, verse 10. Where then did Maximin find the secret of his virtue, the perfection of which lies in patience? In prayer, and especially in the fidelity of reciting the rosary every day of his life, which was one of his most cherished devotions. During his long illnesses, it can be said that the rosary was his almost continuous occupation. When in health, however, advanced the evening, in his life as a seminarian, student, soldier, or young man of the world, he never went to bed without praying his rosary. Mr. Guidecock from Pontmain, his best friend and companion in the regiment of the Pontifical Zouaves, said of Maximin, quote, "I could not prevent him from praying part of the night," unquote. Without prayer, one suffers like the damned. But with prayer, one sanctifies all the trials of life, even the most difficult ones, humiliations. In 1865, on his return from the Pontifical Army, Maximin went to live in the villa of the Jourdain couple near Paris. For about 3 years he lived there in honor, and, as he was believed to be rich, he was received frequent visits. He even received at his table and under his roof a peculiar table companion, who repaid him for his hospitality by jokes and bad taste, which became habitual by calling the shepherd of LaSalette a count and a duke. This individual saw in Maximin, in reality, only a rustic and a peasant playing the great lord in the beautiful property of his benefactors. He made him feel it, even at table, with invectives and buffoonery, exceeding all limits. Maximin's patience could not be understood, but one day this patience was truly heroic. The insulted man rose from the table and sincerely embraced his insulter. This trait of goodness of soul was witnessed personally by a preacher who reported it to Father LaBailiff, his biographer. He himself, in turn, read in a rule of life, which the shepherd had drawn up for himself, this resolution, quote, "I will endure insults and scorn without complaint."